BCL 650 presents your source for leading-edge news and information on today's hottest products and services. This is Experts on Call.
Good evening and welcome to 650 CIL-StrataLife in BC. I'm Tony Giaventu, the host of the show, and with me in the studio tonight I have Paul Mendez from L'Esperance Mendez Law Corporation. Welcome to the show, Paul.
Thank you, Tony.
And Dan Schmidt from Remdel Painting and Restoration. Dan, nice to have you on the show again.
Nice to be here.
And Dan O'Hearn from QuayPacific Management, Strata Managers in New Westminster.
Hey, Tony. Good to be here.
Tonight's show, we're going to actually focus on what we do for planning of major construction. And now that we have so many strata corporations who've actually started their depreciation reports and implemented their depreciation reports, they now see on the horizon major projects that are coming up. And one of the proactive benefits of doing this, of course, is to make sure you fix things before they fail, before wood has rotted and before the plans happen. And so, you know, the big question everybody has, I think, right across the board, and we'll kind of do this from the management, the contractor, and the legal side, is the big question of when do we actually start planning for major construction? So we have a depreciation report, we're in a high-rise building, we have facings and materials that need to be painted on a routine basis. The report says that the project's due in 2020. Well, here we are in 2015. We know, we have an estimate of what that price is going to look like, but when do we actually start planning for that project? And that's the big question I think many strata corporations ask themselves. So you know, from a contractor side, Dan, how much time do you guys need in preparation?
Well, from our side, we probably need a lot less than the strata actually needs. I would suggest, though, that probably about 2 years out is when you really begin to need to zero in on what's going on at that project, because the depreciation report will have given you a really nice ballpark on what the dollars are supposed to be. But they really don't represent reality until you get close to the time frame. So about 2 years out, you can begin to say, okay, here's what we're thinking needs to be involved. Let's get a couple of experts out that can take a look at the building and tell us what really needs to be done and begin to start that budget process. It's an education process that needs to happen for both the contractor, but really for the strata at that point, I think.
So Dan, you're in a situation, you manage the properties, and your staff are dealing with the strata. You've got a depreciation report you're implementing. 2 years out is great for the project itself, but what about all the other steps of planning that have to take place in between?
Yeah, absolutely. At least, well, moving forward, 5 years out is probably when you got to at least address what these costs are going to be. There may be special levies. How does that corporation want to fund this? Do they want to start doing levies incremental, or is it something that they're going to talk about doing in a one lump sum payment months before the project starts, right? So we always take looking at projects 1 year, 2, 3, 5, and 10 years down the road. And when you get to that 3-year rate, you're looking at the painting that might be coming up. And certainly 1 year out when you're doing your budget planning, you're saying, okay, now it's going to happen, and then you start critically planning on how it's going to be collected. But certainly over the last few years, there's been discussions at AGMs about how people want to fund this thing, whether they want to pay monthly or whether everyone wants to just start saving on their own and then be prepared to write one check.
Well, and I know from our experience of working with stratas on implementing depreciation reports, you really need to have a constant 10-year plan that's on the cycle. Yeah. So that all of these projects, the owners know when they're coming, what the projected costs are going to be, and if people can avoid special levies, right? If we have 5 years and people can increase their contributions to the contingency fund, which is only a majority vote, makes it easier. It doesn't require separate collections. It forms part of the strata fees. If they can get a 5-year cycle going on increasing it, they're paying it on a monthly basis over 5 years. 60 payments over 5 years is a lot easier than one payment of, you know, 12,000 or 15,000 a unit 6 months before the event. So in all of that, Paul, what are some of the legal problems that you see that arise?
Well, I think in terms of the planning stage, one thing that I like to tell people is you do want to get into approvals fairly early because you may not get the approval. It's easy to get approval if you're able to fund it out of the contingency reserve at a majority vote, but you can run into problems on major projects where a 3/4 vote resolution is required. And so there needs to be, if you're planning to start, take advantage of, say, the seasons, you'll want to think about when do I go to a general meeting? If it fails, I can take another kick at the can, or if it fails, I can maybe go and apply for relief under Section 173 of the Strata Property Act to get it approved.
keep that thought about 173 because
I
we'll
will.
come back and talk about
Good.
that.
Good.
Well, and that's becoming more compelling for people now as
Yeah.
we're moving forward.
We find that one of the things that's helped us in a couple of projects where the strata is proactive, like you're describing, they're looking that 10-year out or even 5-year out, is to begin to bring in some informational sessions, right? So actually bring the group together, or maybe talk about what needs to happen out 2, 3, 4, 5 years on the building, even with some photos of kind of representative areas that are in need of repair or replacement, those kind of things. And if you can get people understanding what's going on, suddenly you get that buy-in and maybe beat the 3/4 vote kind of issues that often come up. We see too many projects get delayed by a year or 2 or 3 when they really need to be have the work done that could have been addressed had they been a little more proactive.
Well, one of the little items I think that the general public isn't aware of, because they're just not sophisticated buyers, right? They're not sophisticated purchasers of large contracts, is the time of year when you purchase a contract or negotiate a contract can greatly affect the price.
Absolutely.
It can be 3 to 7% depending on what you're doing. If you're coordinating a project for roofing or painting or outdoor construction, you do it in December and January for next summer. That's
Right.
when contractors are looking for work to plan for next summer. That has an impact on the pricing.
Yeah.
You know, those little decisions with the advanced planning actually can make a substantial difference to the strata when it comes down to their baseline cost.
Yeah, quite frankly, as a contractor, if I'm trying to book for next summer and I know a project is coming up and I can look at it over the winter months when things are a little quieter, that gives me a great opportunity both to be more accurate with my quote. I'm not under the pressure, the time pressures, but also I'm a little more competitive. I want to put that on the books. I want to plan ahead, and so my price, my pencil sharpener, quite frankly, for the strata, and that works out well for them. And if I'm able to be awarded the contract, it works out well for me too.
Well, and if I can jump in, Dan, about getting best price. You know, we try to encourage the corporations to go out and get quotations for the work when they've already approved the work. I mean, I'm sure you'd be much happier to get a call from me saying, hey, we've got the levy, I've got the money in the bank,
Right.
give us a good quote and I'll give you a go ahead in 2 weeks. That's going to be better pricing than give us an estimate and a quote, and then we're going to go to the owners and see if they want to do it, and then we'll get some funding together, and then we'll give you a call for next year.
Yeah,
Right.
Absolutely. Any time you know that the work is going to proceed or very likely to proceed,
Yes.
that brings a reality to it. If we bring our best picture to the table, our best proposal,
Yep.
and we're able to be the chosen vendor, that we know the money's there and we're going ahead with that contract. It's something we put all our efforts into.
But it does open the door, and big question that I get the question all the time from condo owners and from strata councils is, are we required to have more than one bid on a project, right? Does the Act require us? And there's nothing in the legislation that requires that, right? A strata corporation can say, look, we're going to budget $100,000 for this project. We want that contractor, and as long as they get the resolutions to approve it, they can go ahead and do it.
Right.
But that's one of the problems we have in our industry, because we don't have a system of reasonable fairness of benchmarking one quote against another quote, so that we actually know we're getting all the same thing. Some industries are actually easier to do that with, where you have a very specific technical specification.
Right.
And I think, you know, Paul, you could certainly jump in and provide some insight on that. But when you have a well-written technical specification, it makes a significant difference to the outcome of the expectation of what the client gets.
Yeah, I think it's harder on smaller jobs where you're not following a formal tender process to be able to compare bids accurately. As you say, there's no requirement under the legislation, although a lot of people think there is. I mean, one of the complaints that I get a lot from owners when they're concerned about what their strata is up to when it comes to repair and maintenance is they didn't get 3 quotes. And 3 quotes is often something that's a part of the strata management contract, and it's often a policy that people have written in, but it's certainly nothing in the Act. It actually makes good sense to get quotes where possible, to let contractors know that you are obtaining a certain number of quotes so that they know that their bid is going to be it has to be competitive.
Right.
One thing that I discourage people, even in an informal bidding process, is bid shopping. You know, if a person gives you a quote, you shouldn't be going around and sharing that quote with the other ones to try to get them all to undercut each other. You know, in an informal tendering process, there's certainly no law against that, but it can result in legal problems in a formal tendering process. So I think it is important to have procedures, and on the larger jobs you should submit them to formal competitive bidding, and on the larger jobs consider getting a consultant who prepares the bid documents. And when you get that done, when you have a formal call for tenders, you are going to have a better time comparing the bids, because the specifications are there, the requirements are all there, every contractor is bidding on the exact same thing, and you're relying on the advice of that expert to make sure you get the best bid for your project.
Well, it's not only the best bid for your project, but you're managing risk as well, right? Like you're wanting to take away the risks that this project is going to be a base price, but come with 50 or 100% of the extras that we hadn't anticipated for, right? Like you want to ensure that you're protecting yourself as the consumer, and it's all the details that we don't think about until after the project. Geez, we should have done this. That's why we use technical writers to fill in those gaps for us, and things on job performance and time periods of performance and conditions of the site and warranties and other types of provisions of bonding and insurance, and all of those conditions. One of the challenges, again, a challenge we see when there's something goes badly, and that's usually when people call me when things have gone badly, is they underestimating the complication or the demands of a job just because it's not expensive.
Yes.
Right? A $5,000 power washing job on a building can easily do a couple $100,000 of damage to a building. And yet you may have hired someone who has no liability insurance, who has, absolutely no terms and conditions around a contract. So, so sometimes the price itself isn't as critical, but in as much as the technicality of the contract.
Well, and you mentioned earlier that sometimes the strata councils aren't really that educated on construction law, right? And that's not unexpected, frankly, right? And so bringing a consultant in, whether that be on a painting job, a consultant like the master painters or some of the other inspection agencies, or we do a lot of concrete restoration, membrane, that kind of thing. So we're seeing some of the larger engineering firms that have done maybe the depreciation reports, and they're weighing in with a consultant, kind of wrapping the contract in construction language, allowing for the bonding process and all those other P's and Q's and crosses of T's and dots of I's that if they're there, not only give you a similar scope of work to work from, but also allow the protection of the contractor and the strata or the building owners.
No, certainly it's for the consumer's best interest, but for all of us when we're at the end of these projects. You're listening to QuayPacificStrataLife here in British Columbia. If you have any questions, we'd love to hear from you. You can send your emails to questions@strata.life, and we'll be right back after these messages.
This is Experts on Call on CIL 650.